Bonjour à tous. Donc, je suis Marion Lamarque. Je suis présidente du réseau Color de Life. Donc, Color de Life, vous ne savez peut-être pas tous exactement ce que c'est. C'est deux choses. La première, une agence spécialisée dans l'accompagnement des marques et des institutions dans toutes leurs problématiques liées à la couleur, donc que ce soit lié aux produits, lié aux espaces, à l'identité, à la communication. La couleur est l'alliance entre le marketing et le design. Elle fait souvent débat et avec Color de Life, l'idée c'est qu'elle ne fasse plus débat, mais au contraire que tout le monde au sein d'une entreprise ou d'une institution sache l'utiliser, puisse en parler, d'où le webinaire aussi d'aujourd'hui, puisque la deuxième mission de Color de Life, c'est d'organiser des événements, des rencontres pour partager les potentiels de la couleur au service de la RSE. Nous croyons au sein du réseau que la couleur, elle doit faire du bien à celui qui la voit, elle doit faire aussi du bien à celui qui la produit et surtout ne pas abîmer nos écosystèmes, voire les régénérer si cela est possible. On fonctionne en mode réseau, c'est-à-dire que chez Color de Life, il y a une quarantaine d'experts qu'on va pouvoir activer en fonction des différents besoins. Et on peut considérer aujourd'hui que NCS fait aussi partie de ce réseau, puisque évidemment, c'est une entreprise qui propose des outils et des services que nous utilisons dans notre quotidien et que nous conseillons aussi parfois. Euh, je vois aujourd'hui quelques membres du réseau aussi. Je pense à Olivier, je pense à Sofiane notamment, que j'ai sous les yeux. L'idée aujourd'hui, bah, c'est de passer un bon moment tout en apprenant, découvrant éventuellement des solutions qui pourront vous être utiles dans votre quotidien.
Oui, très rapidement, on aimerait avoir pu vous rejoindre à temps ce matin. Donc, je vais faire une petite présentation très rapide. Donc, Adrien Maschino, designer coloriste, associé co-gérant de l'atelier 3D Couleur, qui est la première agence de design couleur en France. Et donc, nous, on accompagne depuis plus de 30 ans les industriels, les architectes, les designers dans leur stratégie couleur, le développement de leurs outils, la conception de gamme, de collections, d'outils de nuanciers. Et on travaille également beaucoup, on accompagne les villes et les collectivités à développer des chartes couleurs. Et on a une grande proximité avec l'architecture parce qu'on est également architecte d'intérieur. Donc on a à la fois, on réalise à la fois des projets et à la fois on recommande aussi, on accompagne les industriels du second œuvre qui ont besoin aussi de l'œil et d'avoir cette sensation aussi de savoir les besoins de leurs utilisateurs, qu'ils soient architectes, designers ou même consommateurs grand public et applicateurs des produits. Et on utilise beaucoup le système NCS en tant que créatif. Je crois que je suis pas le seul à utiliser NCS autour de cette vidéo. C'est un outil qu'on recommande beaucoup parce qu'en tant que, évidemment, coloriste expert, on a besoin d'un véritable système pour travailler. On a besoin d'expliquer la couleur à nos clients et eux-mêmes ont besoin de l'expliquer à leurs propres clients. Et quand ils l'ont bien expliqué, en règle générale, on vend mieux les produits, on comprend mieux les produits, on arrive mieux à faire nos projets, que ce soit nous en tant qu'architectes ou les clients consommateurs qui veulent associer des teintes, associer des produits, associer des revêtements. Et donc, c'est un peu des solutions magiques pour travailler facilement avec la couleur. Et souvent, on dit que la couleur fait peur, mais elle fait vendre. C'est une phrase très marketing. Mais en tout cas, la compréhension de la couleur aide à faire les projets, aide à être en confiance et aide à bien associer les produits de ce qu'on œuvre. Et voilà. Donc, ravi de participer à ce cycle de webinaires et de conférences avec NCS et Marion. Et puis, si vous avez des questions, je me tiens également à votre disposition.
Et ce qu'il a oublié de vous dire, c'est que A3DC, c'est aussi un organisme de
Oui,
formation.
Marion.
Voilà,
On est
donc
également organisme de formation certifié Calliope à la couleur. Et donc, on forme chaque année des architectes et designers. On forme également beaucoup les équipes prescription des industriels et services marketing qui travaillent avec la couleur. Et évidemment, dans nos formations, on forme aussi au système MCS avec des cas concrets. Donc, si vous voulez aller un peu plus loin sur le système et travailler avec des échantillons en atelier, ben, n'hésitez pas à me solliciter également. Pour, ce sera un plaisir de vous former sur la couleur et sur NCS.
I start and introduce myself. My name is Ulrika, and I work as area sales manager at NCS Color. And primarily, of course, that includes having responsibility for our collaborations that we have in South and Middle of Europe and in France, particularly. Since a couple of years, we are intensing our relationship with different sources in France, and along our collaboration with Color the Life and Autre, we have the chance to go deeper down and finding new ways and connections. And this is really, really nice to have you on this webinar as a second step after a event we had in Paris, the 23rd of September. And if you have any thoughts or relations that you want to discuss or just questionnaires after this webinar, you're welcome to reach out to me and we take it from there. And Karl will also introduce you more to the NCS, as we are a global, multicultural and multilingual company that works all over the globe. But we come back to the system and the language of color that we speak. So thank you again for taking this time. Thank you.
Ska jag prata nu?
Yeah. Yes, you can go ahead, Karl.
Hang on. Technical issues.
No, we hear you.
Bonjour à tous. Je m'appelle Karl Johan Bertilsson. Je parle pas français. Ouais, je parle un peu de français, mais pas not enough to talk in French and give a presentation in French. I'm one of the dinosaurs, very, very old people. You see my very white beard. I've been with the company or working with NCS for more than 27 years, responsible for establishing NCS globally. I'm also I'm the creative director, which is a beautiful title. Responsible for developing our color trends, of course, and all the creative concepts that we manage in the world. And today I have the big honor and pleasure to introduce you in just a very, very, very short moment about 80 years of history and all of the things that takes a long time to explain. So I need you to put on the safety belts because it's going to be very fast. But the good thing is that you have us, you have Ulrika, you have Marion. So if you have questions, you can contact us. This is kind of a very quick introduction to why we need a color language, what NCS actually is, and then introducing you to our vision, our forecast of the color trends of 2026. Is that okay?
Avec Adrien, quand on a organisé cet événement, nous souhaitions, et NCS, nous souhaitions parler du langage de la couleur par tous ses aspects. Et je vais prendre l'exemple d'un projet que j'ai mené avec Rouge-Gorge Lingerie, où nous avons travaillé les couleurs de marque. Et quand on travaille la couleur d'une marque, on va d'abord s'intéresser à ses valeurs, les messages, qu'est-ce qu'elle veut transmettre. Donc, on va parler plutôt un langage marketing, un langage client, un langage sensible. Rouge-gorge, nous avons choisi un rouge, nous voulions qu'il exprime la sensualité, nous voulions qu'il soit évidemment lumineux, qu'il exprime la féminité également. Et donc tout ça, c'est ce que nous avons travaillé avec la direction de la marque. Mais une fois que nous avons défini de quel rouge nous avions besoin, il faut produire ce rouge. Et il faut le produire évidemment sur des cartes de visite, il faut le produire sur un écran, mais il faut aussi le produire sur une enseigne, sur des stickers qui vont être posés sur du mobilier, etc., etc. Et pour cela, il faut utiliser des références qui sont stables dans le temps, qu'on va pouvoir recommander 10 ans après, parce qu'une couleur de marque ne se change pas tous les 5 ans, et qu'on puisse communiquer à l'ensemble des fournisseurs. Et c'est dans ce cadre, par exemple, que je suis allée choisir avec la marque une référence NCS, que nous avons posé une référence dans le système NCS. Et donc j'insiste, et c'est ce que va préciser Karl, on ne va pas parler de nuancier aujourd'hui, On va parler de système.
Ladies and gentlemen, messieurs, dames, this is now the moment where we begin talking about the color language. As Marion said, which is very, very important, the idea of this very small, short seminar is to give you a little input on why NCS was developed and why a color language is very, very important. And it's like Marion says, we're not talking about Fandex. Because one of the big problems on this planet when we work with color and color design and color communication is that everybody refers to a collection of colors. NCS was never meant to be a collection of colors. That came later when we wanted to simplify things. The idea of NCS was to create a color language that everybody could speak. So when we need to talk about color, we speak the same language and we avoid all misunderstandings, okay? When I thought about this, when we did the event in Paris, one of the things that I thought is to make the comparison to music. Because the scientists, when they began the research, or when they presented why they wanted to do this, they made this beautiful comparison of how important it is for a musician to have notes, to read notes, the same way as a color designer, a color architect, or a color person needs to read something to understand what we're doing. Because the challenge is always when we work with color, number one is to understand what we're looking at. And we cannot reduce ourselves to refer only to X number of colors. We have to talk about the complete color world, right? All of the colors. So the challenge is if we can perceive millions of colors, we need to have a language that can describe all of these millions of colors. The color collections is just a small compromise, simplification, to establish certain standardized positions, right? But the comparison to music is very valid because if you know music, you have the note. And just by showing you this, if you know music, you know what I'm talking about. It does not matter if you play the trumpet, the guitar, the violin, you know exactly what tone to take, right? And it's exactly the same with color and with NCS. When I show you this, you should be able to visualize what I'm talking about. You should be able to understand the color. That's the idea of NCS, right? So if you compare to music, if we just take from a philosophical perspective, right? We know that music creates well-being, and it's exactly the same as color. Color is something that is very important. All research shows that we need colors in our life to create well-being, the same as music. And this is why, through history, there has been so much research. Try to understand how to create the most beautiful color collective, the color, symphony like music, right? The very important thing to understand is that just because you understand a musical note, you don't become Beethoven, right? But Beethoven would not exist if he didn't have the note system when he composed the music. We can be beautiful in color and in music and do things without notes and without the description of color. But how can we discuss it? How can we communicate it? How can we work with it, balancing our intuition, our passion for music or color, together with the rational thinking of what should be done in our project, right? So the same thing with color. Just because you understand how to describe color, it doesn't make you a star, right? But when you have the description of color, it makes life so much easier when you need to communicate, when you need to define, describe, and at the end present something that is a good color design, right? So we have to translate the musical notes into color notes, right? And when it comes to color, we have to talk about all the dimensions of color. This began in the 1930s in Sweden. And this is because we live close to the North Pole. It's dark, it is cold, it's nasty. We don't have colors big part of the year. So in this country, the architects always wanted to understand how can we use color in the correct way? Because in our country, it's super important. And I think it's in France too. So they began the research a long time ago. And when they sat down in the 1930s, they looked at each other and said, okay, let's create a language. Let's make life seem easier to make color decisions. They said, what should it be based on? And I show you this because you're French, because one of the most important iconic color researchers, ever in history is Michel-Eugène Chevreul, that you probably know. But he said something that is extremely important that the researchers got stuck on. Color only exists if there's an observer. In other words, if we translate this in simple words, a color language should be based on our visual perception. A color language should describe what we see, nothing else, because that's the only thing that is relevant for all of us. Some of you produce color, control color, etc. That's your thing, right? But what is the same for everybody is what we describe what we see. So they began looking at different theories, and they saw this guy, Ewald Hering, this German guy, that in 1874 developed what they called the opponent color theory. Understanding that our color vision, even though we have an RGB vision in our eyes, it is then translated into 6 channels, which is yellow, blue, green, red, and white, black, which are the opponent colors, right? So based on this, they created a company in 1945, which in those days, the Scandinavian Color Institute. So it's 80 years. I just wanted to show you this. We're celebrating 80 years this year. This is a long time, and this is about research and education. Let me go back once again. In 1945, the company was established, and until 1979, this was only education and research, nothing else, right? It's not until 1979 when the color collections, the color samples were launched. In 1969, the actual system was launched in the market, right? And one of the first things that they had to define when they decided to, okay, let's develop a language that is for everybody. Now, number one, do we see the same color? And that was the first thing they proved. Then we see a color, we see the same color. Right? Our interpretation, our feeling might be different, but the perception is the same for all of us, more or less, if we not have color deficiency, right? And they proved that when we are born, we already programmed with these colors that Ewald Hering mentioned, that we call the 6 elementary colors. So they said that to be able to describe all of these millions of colors that exists, we always have to refer to these colors that are already programmed in us since we're babies, the elementary colors, right? So these 6 colors are placed in a 3-dimensional color space. Because when we talk about color, we always need to talk about 3 dimensions. We talk about the hue of the color, as you can see in the circle, and for each hue, you have different nuances, different how white they are, how black they are, and how chromatic they are, right? So in this color space that you see in front of you, there is a position for all these 10 million colors that we can perceive. All of the colors, it doesn't matter what color system you use, all of the colors can be described with NCS. And I repeat, this is the most important thing about NCS, that NCS can describe all colors, surface colors, right? No exceptions, only if there's special effects, right? But we talk about flat colors. And this is really the essence of everything, because with the help of this, it doesn't matter what you have. When you look at the color, you should be able to describe it and understand what you see. And then we can discuss it, we can talk about it, we can communicate it, and we can define it in a proper way, right? So the description of NCS, as you can see here, is the color family, where we are in the color circle, right? A red color with 20% blue in this case. In this case, this specific nuance of this hue is a 10-40. Everything is a percentage, 0 to 100. So it's 10% of blackness, as you can see, and 40% of chromaticness, which means that it's not a dark color, and it's not super strong, but it's a chromatic color, right? And the color is a bluish red color. Now we can begin visualizing the color. Let me show you in the graphs. R20B is here. As you can see, we read always clockwise from yellow to red to blue to green, right? step by step. And in a color circle, we test steps by 10, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. But obviously between these steps, there are other colors, right? But this is what we have standardized, the 2000 colors that we have standardized, right? So here we have R20B. So for this color family, R20B, there are many members, right? In this case, this member is 10% black, 40% chromatic. There is a third component in this, which is the whiteness that we have to also keep in mind, because the sum of the nuance always has to be 100. So in this case, you have 10% of blackness, 40% of chromaticness, and the rest, 50%, because it has to be 100, is the whiteness of the color. So the nuance always has to be 100, which means you cannot have a color that's 60-60, 70-70, right? Because it's too much. Understanding this, taking this, and I'm not asking you to, grasp this immediately. I'm sure most of you know what this is all about, but I tell you this because this is the essence. When we talk about color trends, we have to understand that we always talk about the drifts in the color space, right? If it's a neutral color, it doesn't have any chromaticness. So obviously it's an N as neutral, right? So if you take an example, 1977 195R, as I began with, if you visualize this color, it is 90% black. It is not dark, but it's not very whitish. But it's 77% chromatic. It's a quite strong color, right? Which means that the whiteness of this color is very little. So it's a strong, little dark, strong color. And it's a red color with 5% yellow that we call Y95R because we go clockwise in the color circle, right? I will not ask you to define this color, but we usually do. But if you try to visualize this color, it's a very strong red color, right? In this case, a Ferrari red color, right? It could be Coca-Cola, but now once again, we have NCS, so we can define the differences that the Coca-Cola red is lighter, also cheaper, because we know that light chromatic colors are perceived as cheaper colors, while the Ferrari red is a little bit darker red, which we perceive as a more luxurious color. Coca-Cola is more yellowish, Ferrari red is more reddish. Now we can discuss the colors, right? We don't have so much time, but I just need to give you the comparison of this, or definition of this, right? Like in music, we need to describe the exact tone, right? Because it's not enough that I show you the tone. It has to be also exact to create the beautiful music, right? This means that we also need instruments, and these instruments has to be very, very fine-tuned, because when we play in an orchestra, a group, and play together, it has to be the perfect tone. If we take this tone that I show you, or that we want to tone, it has to be perfect in together with everything else. This is exactly the same as with NCS. We need instruments, we need the tools, and they have to be perfect, they have to be precise, because we create the music together. Lars Kivik, one of the psychologists behind the NCS system, he always says that, color never lives alone. Color always lives together with other colors. So at the end, most of the time, we're not talking about understanding a color. We need to understand how the colors will live together. Exactly like with music. How will the trumpet, the guitar, the trombone play together to produce this beautiful music, right? So the exact color is very, very important to understand. How do we put things together? And now that we have the NCS system, we can describe the positions and we can understand how these different tones, different nuances, different hues play together, right? So we have the instruments, we have the tools to do this, right? We will not spend time talking about the tools, but it's very important to understand that together with NCS, which is the exact description, the visual description of the color, it always comes together with an extremely precise color sample that never varies, right? So together with this, we can create the symphonies, we can create the music, the combinations. Because now when we know this, we also know that when we understand the different nuances, the different hues of color, we also know that when color have something in common, like in music, if you want to play the same, notes, you will hear in harmony. The same in color. When you have colors with a similarity, we create an harmony. Like in this case, we see the green of the chlorophyll, the red of this very typical Swedish house looks beautiful together because they are in the same nuance area, right? These colors have the same chromaticness, the same hue. These colors have the same nuance exactly. These colors have the same blackness, the same chromaticness, the same whiteness. And this is not the only way of creating a symphony of colors, it's just one way. But it makes things so much easier to understand when you sit there putting everything together, how you can think, how you can reason to make a beautiful color design. Okay? So, NCS, this is very important. NCS is not the color palette, right? It's a color language that describes all of the colors we can see. You can compare it to musical notes. It's like the musical notes but for colors, right? And it describes all of the colors we can perceive, all of them. It is the only system, this is important to underline, NCS is the only system that exists in the world that describes color 100% based on visual perception. There's one other system that is similar, which is the Mondial system in the United States, but it's not 100% visual, okay? So, together with this knowledge, together with NCS, and understanding how to create combinations with similarities, it makes life so much easier when you create color designs, right? Oh my gosh, I'm trying to summarize for 80 years of research. Anyway, let's look at the color trends. Something that we have been working with for many, many years, okay? I actually began in Latin America in 2007, I think was my first meeting of color trends in Buenos Aires in Argentina to develop the color trends for Latin America. And since then, we have been focusing on doing this. In the beginning, we didn't want to touch color trends because we are a research institute. This is science. And we always said that, you know, when we talk about color trends, it's a forecast. We cannot assure 100% that it's going to be correct because we don't know. But with time, we understood that we need to talk about it and we have to do it in the most precise way, talking about how our color preferences change over time. And with the NCS system, we can do this. We can analyze, we can plot our color preferences from today and how they move towards tomorrow, right? I always say when I talk about color trends that to understand the color trends of tomorrow, the most important thing is to understand the color trends today. Because our color preferences change little by little. Things push our color trends in certain directions for a reason. Okay, there is research, as you can see in front of you, by Leonhard Oberacher from Austria, that has studied how this repetitive cycle, you know, you've heard so many times, oh, the colors from the 1970s are back, etc. And it's partially correct. It's not 100% the truth, but partially it's a repetitive cycle. Our mind, our psychology works like this. When we are bombarded with color impressions for a period of time, our mind gets tired of the color impressions and our mind wants to go to the other extreme. So to make this very clear, if we are in a stage with neutral colors and we get tired of neutral colors, we want to go through to the colorful phase. To be able to get there step by step, our mind has to get accustomed how to get to the colorful phase, right? First, we adopt some chromatic colors, then we need to purify our brain to make the colors bluish, violet, before we can adopt these. So we follow this color cycle very closely. This is not the complete truth, but it's partially the truth because color is psychology, okay? And depending on our psychology is what color preferences we have over time, right? Then together we gather a group of color trend experts from all the world. We have from China, from Italy, from the UK, from Germany, from the United States, from China, and obviously from France. people that work with color and color forecasting. Many of them are CMF, color material, because color material is usually very much linked. And we discussed together to see what synergies can we find from different regions and different industries. So we asked them very simply, okay, in your region, in your industry, what colors are trendy today, and what do you visualize will happen tomorrow, in 1 year, in 2 years? So these we plot into the color space, and then we make the comparison. We compare the colors, right? To see if there are very obvious synergies, because the color trends we present are global color trends, right? That should be recognized, or you should feel that they make sense independently where you are in the world. Okay, so as you can see, when we did this in the very beginning, before we began the real work in discussing, analyzing, you could see some very important things. You can see there is a big focus on reddish colors, a big focus on bluish colors. A very important and interesting part is also that yellow colors are greenish yellow. Most of the time, when we talk about colors, yellow colors, traditionally, not trend, but traditionally, we prefer reddish yellow colors. One of the very important trends or drifts that we saw is that we're moving towards greenish yellow colors. Okay, they're already here, but it seems like the focus will be much more on greenish yellow than on reddish yellow, at least for now and for 2026. We also see that colors are kind of going a little bit darker. They're not super chromatic, but they're still chromatic. We need chromatic colors, but the chromatic colors we have are usually quite reddish, okay? So we see drifts if you compare the different years towards a little bit darker, still chromatic colors, very important. I will come back to this. Then we begin analyzing our psychology, the world's psychology, because the psychology always pushes our color preferences in preferring some color areas, okay? And we know that for the last 5 years, we have been through a period that's been quite depressing. We have the pandemic, we have the wars, we have the economy, a lot of things that have made, the world look a little bit worrisome, okay? We know parallel to this, because we have been through decades of preferring, focusing on much neutrals, white, gray, blacks, low chromatic colors. And we have seen for years now that has been building up this need or wish to have more colors in our life. But it's been stopped a lot about, the depression of the world. We haven't really been able to exploit these colors. But we see a very clear sign that we want to welcome more colors into our lives, okay? We believe that this year, and I'm telling you this now in October 2025, and the year is ending, and we still are like, we don't know. But the thing is, from a psychological perspective, we know that the people in the world are so fed up. We are so tired of all these depressing things. We don't even watch the news anymore. We turn off our televisions, the radios. We switch to something different because we're so tired of listening to this bad news that we receive. We believe that this will push us to finalize things. So what we see, there is a need or wish that 2025 will be a peak year. Will be like, things has to finalize this year. And I really hope this will be the case for most of the bad things, right? So we see that 2026 will be a year for a lot of optimism and hope for the future, with a lot of focus on the human and our planet. A lot of more focus back from what we have forgotten about the climate a lot. The climate change is here. We will come back and focusing on our planet, the beauty of our planet, and the human being. And this is a thing that we see very clearly. The more AI, artificial intelligence, is present in our life, the more focus it is on the human value. Okay? So we see this very clearly. We see a very, very clear direction of leaving minimalism to the nostalgia of returning to the past of our cultural desire of color. which is very important. So this is a very clear direction. No more minimalism. We want to surround ourselves with more colors, okay? We even talk to people today at exhibition. We have been to Maison et Objet, we have been to Milan, all over the world, Stockholm Design Week, everywhere. And we talk to people who exhibit, they say, you know, this year we need to show color. If we don't show color, people don't come to our booth. It's very important because people want to see color now. So if there is one thing you should remember from this color trend presentation is that we are welcoming color into our lives. We want to have color. It doesn't have to be super chromatic, but we want to step away from the neutral, minimalistic expression to be a more colorful expression, okay? Today's situation is not clear, so it's kind of stopping us to have this enormous explosion of feelings or using super high chromatic colors. So it's a little bit more careful. Okay, let me present to you our forecast number 1 that we call quietude. Quietude is the first small step into a world that for a lot of us have been preaching for years that if you want to have a home that feels luxurious, it should be white, minimalistic. We are taking a first step into a direction of understanding that white is definitely not a feeling of luxurious. Okay? We want to surround ourselves with careful colors, marbles, gold, things that makes it feel luxurious. But to make it feel luxurious, we have to have a variation of colors. We have been discussing a lot about what we call the new imperfect whites. Okay? We are leaving the whites and we want to surround ourselves with light colors that have some hue, that have some chromaticness. Imagine yourself, you know, a beautiful constellation of marble, right? And we see, once again, as I said in the beginning, that the greenish yellow, so we present the main color, the hero color of this trend is a G90Y, meaning it's a yellow color with 10% green, right? A very beige, low chromatic, light color, but it still has 10% chromaticness, and it's a greenish yellow color, right? Together with this, we see these other very low chromatic colors, warm most of them, and then we have the one contrast of a very blue color, very low chromatic new color that we have in the collection, 1001B, and I can show you now in the graphs, which makes life so much easier. You can see the colors are very low chromatic, very light. They have enough distance, contrast, to be able to use them together, because if they're too close, they're difficult to work together. But if you make a distance, a contrast, we can put them together and it makes them feel good. So we have similarities in nuance. They're most of them very warm yellow colors, and then we have a complementary blue color that is very important to highlight this trend. Okay, trend number 2 we call homecoming. And once again, repeating this idea that AI that is taking over most of us use AI now, ChatGPT, etc. The more we make reference to AI, the more we want to highlight that it's a human design. And we see this everywhere now, that architects and designers are producing things that need to look as human as possible. This is not an AI design. This is a human design. The human being is very important. At the same time, is the welcoming, is the search to come back to our origins and our roots. During the pandemic, we talked about, localism, that we were obliged, we had to stay at home. And when the pandemic was over, we kind of began looking at the world again. But it left a seed that we liked our homes. Our roots were not that bad. What we now talk about now, it's a luxurious localism. We look at our local areas, what comes from our local, the local area, or our things that comes from our roots. We remake them and we make them modern and beautiful, right? So the hero color of this was a very, very important color, and it's everywhere today, and it's taking a very big position, which is a yellowish, this could be wood, it could be leather, it's very natural, it's very human, it's very warm color, okay? That is very, very important in this story. Surrounding with this, we have the only remainder of green, because what we see for 2026 that we stop talking about green a lot, but the greens that we talk about are extremely yellowish. So you can see we have G80Y, which is very, very yellowish green colors, balancing together with some darker, lower chromatic red colors, and one fresh R30B color. And you can see in the graphs, for you knowing how NCS, you see a very interesting plot, very similar nuance positions, very different in hue, so the contrast is there. We have the beautiful contrast, we have the similarities, and we have one accent that makes this palette much more interesting. That is homecoming. Trend number 3 is we call symbiosis, okay? Possibly this trend is what we have seen in the industry that's been adopted because it's a very powerful, it's a very strong trend that it seems that everybody identifies themselves with. We have talked about that red is the new green, saying that today with sustainability, we can actually produce reds, high chromatic colors, with the pigments that exist that are sustainable. Green, we have been focusing on green for so long that green is not the trend anymore. What we do see is that we are leaving what we call the biophilia into a world that is more a symbiosis, and that is involving ourselves or emerging ourselves into the nature. And the total immersion is not in green, it's in blue. It's in the depth of our oceans. It's the feeling that you are one with the nature, right? So we see this very deep blue color taking a very big space, and it's a reddish blue color that we need to see, and we see this everywhere now. It's popping up and it's becoming extremely important. It's R70B, okay? So it's a blue color with 30% red, R70B, quite dark chromatic color. Together with lighter chromatic colors, it's like, stars in the sky in space, or when you dive into the beautiful warm oceans with the coral reefs and the fish, right? That gives this enormous feeling of well-being. And this color trend has actually been adopted by a lot of companies now worldwide. They say this is perfect because people love to see these colors, right? As you can see, you have similarities in hue here, and the complementary is warm shades. So it's a beautiful complement that we have. They are very similar in what we call the blackness. As you can see, they're very blackness similar. And then we have a very dark accent, which is the main color, which makes a beautiful composition of color combinations here. The last one, and the most dramatic color trend, we call renegade. And renegade is all about that I said in the beginning, we have been building up this wish for a long time of welcoming more colors in our lives, but we're a little bit careful. But what we see now for a group of people, not everybody, but for a group of people, we are literally exploding. It can be of happiness. Hopefully it will be of happiness next year, but it's also an expression of explosion of frustration, anger that we want to change the world. Okay? Challenging the status quo. It's revolutionary. This is not about harmonizing things. This is about a statement of showing colors that, with energy of wanting to change things. Okay? So we see, like, we call this a peak year of the reds. The reds now are a little bit darker and duller, but we believe that the very high chromatic 0580Y90R, the slightly yellowish red color, will take a big position. Not only on small accents, it can be used on big surfaces. But it will be the peak year of the reds, we believe, next year. Then probably there will be so much red that will kind of, too much. But we believe that red will be a very important color for next year, right? Surrounding by other colors, high chromatic colors, One G80Y, once again, a very greenish yellow high chromatic color. That's composition together with a little bit more low chromatic colors. Not once again, this is not about harmony. This is about creating a color palette that wakes people up, that causes reactions, right? That's what we call this renegade. So these are the four groups of colors that we forecast for 2026. We already see this happening on the market. I just came back from Dallas. I was in Milan and Paris the week before, and we already see these colors popping up on the markets. So super interesting, very important. As you can see in our forecast, greens are not there. Green we don't see as a trend color. We've used green, but it's not new. What is new is that there will be a lot of reddish blue colors, a lot of warm shades, a lot of high chromatic reds, and the greenish yellows. And the high chromatic colors will be reds mainly, but we are drifting the rest, in mid-tones, low chromatic colors, very important. That direction we see also now for 2027 is a very important direction to the lower chromatic light colors. Dark chromatic colors are important. We believe that the main color will be bluish for 2026. Okay. And in our web page, in our app, in what we call the NCS Plus app, you can download for free. You can see the evolution of colors throughout the years, the way we forecast and how they move around in the hue circle, obviously in the nuance, and how they change and drift, which is that very, very important information. So you see how our preferences drift, so you can understand if it continues that direction or it will change in another direction, right? I don't even know what time it is, but I talk too much. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. That's all from me.
Merci, Karl. Et alors, est-ce que tout le monde a réussi à s'en sortir? Tout le monde a compris l'anglais et le système ou Adrien qui a pu nous rejoindre ou moi-même, hein, donc Adrien de l'atelier 3D couleurs, ou moi-même, on peut aussi prendre quelques minutes pour vous expliquer le système NCS. Adrien forme aussi à l'utilisation du système, il pourra le faire. Est-ce que ça a été clair pour tout le monde? Quelqu'un a besoin? Dites-nous, hein, n'ayez pas, on peut le faire, il n'y a aucun souci.
Donc, une question de ma part, s'il vous plaît. Ouais.
Vas-y.
S'il te plaît, Marion. Ce que j'ai pas forcément compris dans le système, donc déjà merci pour la présentation, merci pour nous donner cette opportunité, et puis cette présentation très intéressante du système et de ses tendances. Ce que j'ai pas forcément compris, c'est la manière dont elles étaient, dont le système est construit, puisque s'il n'est pas basé sur des mesures, comment on peut arriver à une telle précision visuelle? Donc ça, c'était une première question. Voilà. Comment il est construit, vu que ça se base sur du visuel? Est-ce que c'est plusieurs personnes qui se réunissent? Enfin, comment
Tu parles
à l'origine
de
il a été comment cette
l'origine.
cartographie d'origine pour définir les coordonnées. En fait, les coordonnées, elles sont généralement des mesures. Et là, j'ai pas vraiment compris. À un moment donné, Karl a fait le commentaire que c'était.
Can I answer that question?
Yeah.
Of course.
I can translate in English as well.
Oh, no, it's okay. I
He
understand.
understands French.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Obviously, I mean, we work with, color measurement is very important, of course. So we never disregard color measurement, okay? But to understand how the NCS system was developed, we are talking about hundreds and thousands of experiments with human beings worldwide, where you show color samples, two color samples that are very similar, and you ask people to define, do you see that one is more bluish or one is more reddish? We are talking about more than 20 years investment globally, in all the world, working with universities, with researchers, and doing these experiments and developing exact positions. So when you have a color, so this is 100% visual. Obviously, then they are measured and we pin them into the color space. And we work obviously with C-Lab, and we work with the Delta E's and everything, obviously to secure the fingerprint. But the work with NCS system is 100% visual. That means that every single color that has been developed in hundreds and thousands of experiments, asking people to describe what they see and to compare two colors. So imagine yourself that you translate the delta E into the human vision, okay? And I can tell you that in that sense, NCS is more logical when we talk about color differences in delta E, because your delta E value can be very different in the light areas and the chromatic areas, as you probably know, right? Human vision will see the same difference or the same distance between two colors when you analyze two color samples and you see that this one and this one, they are extremely similar, but they're different. What is the difference? And that is what is being defined in visual terms.
Okay.
Okay? So all of the experiments were made in, with human beings, with visually. I just need to tell you this. The three head scientists of NCS is Anders Hård, who is the leader of experiments. Lars Kivik, he's a psychologist, obviously dictating all of the way that we function in the human brain and eyes. And Gunnar Törnqvist, who is one of the pioneers in color measurement. They together actually created what we call the Association Internationale de la Couleur, AIC. They are the ones who created this. Color measurement is super important. We work with color measurement every day. We have collaborations with everybody in the color measurement world. But that's a balance. It's a complement. We need the measurement, but at the end of the day, we need to show you the human value, the vision, the way we see color, right? So a lot of the experiments were, first of all, proving that the human being, we see color in the same way. The perception that comes to our eye and brain is the same for everybody, more or less. Okay? Number two, then, when we know this, then we can ask a person, if I look at a color, how will I describe this color? And that is also done together with two colors, so we can understand the differences. This is a blue color that is reddish. This is a blue color that is greenish. Okay? And then we narrow the tolerances down to extremely small tolerances. Extremely small, until we see that, okay, these two colors, they look exactly the same. But if we tweak it a little bit, then it's a little bit different. So this one is slightly more blackish, slightly more chromatic, slightly more whitish, or it's slightly more reddish or bluish, right? So that's my point here, is because celebrating 80 years now, 80 years. So it's 80 years of research to reach this point. And that's what, sorry, I talk a lot.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you for the answer. Anyway, I'm much more in favor of visual color assessment than color measurements after experiencing
at the end, that's what matters.
Different color measurement systems. So that's a clear answer. Thank you.
Est-ce qu'il y a
Maybe I can leave the
questions?
floor to others to ask questions. I have another one in case.
Est-ce que quelqu'un d'autre a une question? Sinon, Olivier pourra reprendre. Christophe?
Yes, I have a very down-to-earth question. So I'm always convinced with NCS since a long time. I use it not every day, but in my job. But I have a big question because, as you know, we are under domination of under cultural domination of Pantone. So personally, all the color we use are made are mainly comes from Pantone. So the question is I say also that a lot of our suppliers are working with NCS. Mainly paint manufacturer, decor printers, and so on. They are working with NCS. But we are still in Pantone, and it's a pity. But so the question is very basic: is how can we turn our Pantone references into precise NCS coordinate?
Thank you. I think that is probably the most common question we get from everybody in the world. We have been discussing this for many, many years, and there are translations. All the Pantone colors has an NCS translation. We published this in the 1980s. We published a translation from Pantone to NCS that every Pantone had an exact NCS description, but Pantone told us we could not publish it of legal reasons, so they stopped us. We have discussions, but the challenge with Pantone, and I don't want to talk bad about Pantone at all, but it's something that we have to understand with Pantone is that the color samples of Pantone are printed. Okay, they have they're not very accurate, which means that your Pantone fan deck is different from my Pantone fan deck, even if it's the same color. The problem is that if I would define that in NCS, I will define exactly the color. But which color should I define? Your color or my color? What is the real color I'm defining? And that's what we have been discussing always. When we define if we should translate it into Pantone, we do that. We translate and we can help you to translate. That is no problem. But you have to understand that we translate the Pantone color, it might be slightly different. And I'm talking to you about this, especially if you work with colors that need to be exact, very precise, then it's always a problem. Then it's always better to refer to that you send us the sample, we measure the sample, and you get the NCS exact description of the color. But it's a very good question. We have so many projects in the world globally. We work in more than 90 countries today. Where we always have to work with Pantone. And as Pantone, you have the printing, you have the textiles, you have the plastics, and all of them have different, notations and everything, and they differ quite a lot. It's a challenge. And it's a challenge for us because we have to be more, the idea of us, because NCS is a science, Pantone is not a science, okay? And many people, when we talk about NCS, go like, oh, it's scientific. No, I prefer Pantone. It's just a color collection. And our challenge now, and what we are doing is trying to say, okay, if it's a science, is to make things easier, not more difficult, right? So we try to simply not talk so much about the science. That's why I talked about music, to understand a little about, to get people to get what NCS really is as a color description. But your question is, I can turn the question to Sara and Ulrika because that's what they're working with every day in how to help the companies understand how to work with, both Pantone, because Pantone exists, RAL exists, all of these systems exist. We just have to understand how we will live in this world. You have the possibility, because we have this color pin, the measurement, the color reader. Now, the color reader that you have today, you can measure a color, any color, and you can get an exact NCS description. So if you have that color reader, you can measure the Pantone color and you will have the exact NCS color. So that is possible today. So you can have that. You can do it by yourself. Now I'm talking commercially. I'm not a commercial person, but Ulrika is nodding. Yeah. Right, Ulrika?
For sure. Schedule another hour, one by one later on. No, but I can just refer to what Karl said here, that we have physical and digital tools to help us navigate in communication, in decisions. And this is, of course, something that we work with every day with our partners and customers. And that is another area for that discussion. But for anyone who's interested in, for example, what we now said could be very helpful, a small color reader that we use to have in our pockets every day to pin and get the colors around us with us back home to analyze and find out the differences for helping a customer or finding a project more efficient or whatever it might be to be inspired by when it comes to color communication. Then we would love to talk with you about that for sure. And I can recommend you to have a little short look at our both web shop, but also web page, as Karl referred to before. There you find both inspirational, but also product information. And there you can also require one of these small handy tools that can help you to define and understand the NCS a bit better.
Et si je peux compléter, Christophe?
Yes,
also the color pin a link to the color pin, but also a link to NCS Plus. It's you can sign up for the free version, and also for the Colors Beyond if you want to know a little more in depth.
Oui, justement, c'est ce que je voulais dire sur l'application NCS+. Tu as la possibilité de trouver des correspondances. Il y a une version free. Les micros.
Ouais.
Et donc, il y a une version free. Et moi-même, pour certains clients, nous avons pu traduire l'ensemble de leurs nuanciers en couleurs chez NCS avec des références exactes. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que NCS fabrique aussi ton propre échantillon. Alors, l'exemple que tu connais peut-être, Christophe, c'est le bleu de Décathlon, qui a été à cette époque traduit, donc codifié par NCS. Et donc, nous avions un échantillon, enfin, même 100, hein, ça se commande par 100, mais on avait 100 cartes de cette couleur précise qu'on pouvait transmettre à l'ensemble de nos fournisseurs. Et ce qui est évidemment bien avec NCS, contrairement avec les nuanciers, c'est qu'il y a une garantie de reproduction parfaite. C'est-à-dire si 5 ans après, tu redemandes ta couleur que tu as inventée ou ta couleur qui est propre, et qui te la reproduisent, bah, les 100 échantillons que tu vas recevoir, ce seront les mêmes. Voilà. Donc c'est aussi pour ça que nous, experts, on a plutôt tendance à travailler plutôt avec
Avec
NCS.
NCS, oui, bien sûr.
Voilà, parce qu'on a cette garantie de fiabilité dans le temps, mais aussi on peut avoir ses propres couleurs. Voilà.
Bon, on en recausera, Marion, alors, dans ces cas.
Bah, écoute, avec plaisir. On a un peu dépassé le temps, mais est-ce qu'il y avait d'autres questions? Olivier again? Go ahead. Ah, par contre, tu es en mute.
Alors, in French or English? Okay. Je vais poser en français.
En français, tout le monde.
En français. J'ai fait l'expérience de situations où la couleur réalisable dans un matériau plastique. Donc la question que je voulais vous poser, c'est est-ce que vous, du fait de la technologie pour fabriquer les couleurs, pour créer et fabriquer les couleurs, pour les illustrer, la technologie que vous utilisez, est-ce que vous avez rencontré des cas où la couleur n'était pas faisable, n'était pas atteignable dans votre technologie, mais elle l'était dans une autre technologie? Par exemple, vous pouvez la produire dans du plastique ou avec de la peinture, mais pas avec de l'encre. Est-ce que c'est quelque chose que... Vous voulez que je la pose en anglais?
Yeah, let me just, because what you're answering, because you're absolutely right. I mean, some colors are possible to produce on some material, and some colors are not possible to produce on other material. We work with a lot of industries globally in helping them understand, to making the complete job in making people or companies to understand what colors can be produced and cannot be produced, plotted into the color space. We usually, in a lot of companies, what we do, we go in and we look at what kind of pigments do you use, what kind of material do you have. We make the analysis of what you have and what you work with, and then we make a plot into the color space. So say, okay, if you want to have the same color in plastic and textile or in the different kind of materials, you have to stick to this area in the color space. You cannot go beyond, because you can only produce the colors perhaps in plastics and in paint, but not in textile or something like that. So we help companies understand when they make decisions and they want to have the same color in different materials, what color areas you have to work with and what colors you cannot work with because you cannot produce the colors. That is one thing. But then we have a much, much more sophisticated service in going into actually working together with the technical departments and how to develop colors, how to choose colors, etc. But this is project-based, so each company is different. This is not the standard solution. So we're going to projects. I mean, we work with everybody from IKEA to Siemens to Volvo to, you know, worldwide in helping them in making sure they get the color that they want to have.
Okay. Thank you.
S'il n'y a plus de questions, I will ask Karl to conclude this webinar for motivating us, well, not us, but the audience to use the NCS system.
Yeah.
Tricky,
Yeah.
tricky conclusion.
No, but the idea of the seminar is really, and what we said when we were in Paris 2 weeks ago was that we were very active in France years ago, and then with the pandemic and everything, things stopped. We want to go back to France and work a lot with the French architect designers and the industry, helping everybody become successful with color. That's the idea. You know, and I think that there's so much to talk about when it comes to these things, but it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference both internally and externally when you have a color language that you can use, that you can trust, both with internal communication, external communication, because color communication is one of the most important things. And it doesn't matter who you are and what you do. Maybe you sell cars or you sell whatever you sell, but color is usually the most important decision for a company to make. And if you don't choose the right color for your project, simply it won't be successful, because the decision from the people that buy is so much based on our visual perception of things. So the right color, and to be able to get to the right color, we have to understand from the very beginning what is the color we're working with and how can we get this translated into reality on our product and our project, etc. So we need to have this language to do this, right? They mentioned, I forgot, I didn't mention Mercedes and Renault if you talk about automotive or anything, but you know, this is what more and more companies understand today. Historically, people didn't pay, doesn't matter what color we choose. Today, we know for sure through research and experience that the color decision is many times the most important decision that we have to make when we decide for a project or a product. Okay. So this is why NCS, and keep this in mind, NCS was not developed to be a commercial product. It was the industry who asked NCS to say, you have this system, which is beautiful, 10 million colors, but we cannot work with 10 million colors. Help us simplify things. Give us something to work with, physical color samples, right? So keep this in mind. NCS is a language that describes color, exactly the way we see color. And the only reason for NCS to exist is to help us choose the right color. That's my final word.